Now here you can see a graphical model of the eye, and this is the overall eye structure. Now we'll be going to detail of that every structure. Now here you can see that this portion, this part actually, this total part, this is called the orbital septum. This is called the orbital septum. There are basically two orbital septum. This is the upper orbital septum or superior orbital septum, and this is called the inferior orbital septum or lower orbital septum. Now what actually it does, that it's actually thin fibrous membrane that serve as a barrier between the superficial eyelid and orbit. I mean the superficial eyelids and orbit, just between them it remains as the barrier. Similarly, this is actually the barrier between the lower eyelid and the orbit. If we just remove them, here I just removed the orbital septum. Now we can see that there are two structures here which are in bluish color. This is called this is called the superior tarsus, and this is called the inferior tarsus. Now what are the functions of superior tarsus and inferior tarsus? Now superior tarsus and inferior tarsus, these are basically the structural muscle which actually helps to maintain the elevation of the eyelids. Now superior tarsus, this actually helps to elevate the upper eyelid, and this is called the inferior tarsus. This inferior tarsus, this is actually responsible for the lowering the lower eyelid. So this is the inferior tarsus and this is the superior tarsus. Now here you can see on this medial part there is the medial palpebral ligament connecting the palpebrae. Now if we just remove them, another thing, here you can see that this is called the levator palpebrae superioris. This is actually a muscle which actually helps to do the elevation of the upper eyelid. As we know that this whole cavity, this is the orbital cavity. In the orbital cavity the eye is included, and here on the superior lateral side, in this portion here you can see that this is the lacrimal gland. This lacrimal gland, this is responsible for lacrimal secretion, which actually is tears of the eye. This lacrimal gland helps to wash the dusty materials or any other foreign pathogen. If just they are inserted here, actually they will be flushed out by this lacrimal secretion, and here containing a lot of lysozymes which are responsible for the destruction of the foreign particles. The lacrimal apparatus basically composed of the lacrimal gland, then they are containing the carunculus, puncta, then lacrimal canals, lacrimal sac, and nasolacrimal ducts. So these are the basically structure of the lacrimal apparatus, and these are the actually lacrimal canaliculi. This is called the lacrimal sac, and from lacrimal sac there will be lacrimal duct. This will form the nasolacrimal duct, and this actually responsible for the taking away the lacrimal secretion to the nose. Now here you can see that superior tarsal muscles, or this is called the Mueller's muscles. Now, as I mentioned before, that this is a structural muscle which actually helps to maintain the elevation of the upper eyelids, and these are basically innervated by the sympathetic nervous system. Now here you can see that these are the actually ocular muscles. These are the ocular muscles. You can see it clearly. These are the ocular muscles. Now we'll just separate the ocular muscle and we'll just look and we'll describe about these ocular muscles. There are total 7 muscles. 4 are rectus and 2 oblique and 1 is the retractor muscle. Here you can see that this muscle, actually this is on the lateral side. This is called the lateral rectus muscle, and this lateral rectus muscle, this is responsible for turning the eye laterally. So this is responsible for lateral movement of the eye. Similarly, on this direction, here you can see this is called the medial rectus muscle. Now this medial rectus muscle, this is located medially and this is responsible for the medial movement of the eye. That means it helps to adduct the eye, whereas this lateral rectus muscle, this actually do the abduction of the eye. Now here you can see another muscle. This is superiorly located and this is called the superior rectus muscle, and the superior rectus muscle is responsible for moving the eye upwards. This actually responsible for upward movement of the eye. Similarly, here you can see another muscle which is on the inferior part of the eyeball, and this is called the inferior rectus muscle, which is responsible for moving the eye downwards. Here there are 2 more muscles. This is called the oblique muscle and this is basically called the superior oblique muscle. This superior oblique muscle, this actually rotates the visual axis upwards and medial direction. And if you see this muscle, this is called the inferior oblique muscle, which rotates the visual axis downwards and medial direction. Now on this posterior side, actually we are observing that this is the optic nerve. This is the optic nerve. This is the neuronal continuation of the retina, which is the most inner layer of the eyeball, and this is a part of the central nervous system. So this is the outer part. Actually this is called the sclera, which is the most outer layer, and it actually made by the fibrous connective tissue, and it's very toughest layer. And here you can see that on here and this region, actually this is called the cornea, which is the very transparent area and is about 1/6 of the total eyeball. And here you can see that this is the pupil, which is just bluish in color, and these are the iris. What you can see here in the brown color, these are basically the iris, and this is the sclerocorneal junction or limbus of the sclera and cornea. And if you see it posteriorly, and here you can see that this is the optic nerve. This optic nerve, actually this is piercing here, Now let's go to a little bit deeper. Now I just open the outer layer, and here you can see this is a reddish layer. This is called the choroid layer. This layer is basically called the choroid layer, and also this is called the vascular coat. Dark colored thin vascular membrane composed of the capillary plexus, then they are containing the small blood vessels, as well as they are also containing the loose connective tissue. Now these actually containing different types of pigment cells. Pigment cells help to prevent the right reflection within the eye, so that we can visualize any object clearly. If there was no pigment cell, then it would be very much harmful for us, because it would disturb the visualization. Now basically in case of the animals, especially those of which actually having the nocturnal habit, in case of those animals, this actually presents a reflecting structure, and this actually called the tapetum, now which gives the greenish glare at night. So those animals who are actually nocturnal animals, they actually in this layer actually they are containing a reflect structure, and that is called the tapetum. Now as I mentioned that this is the iris, I'm just removing them. So I'm removing the second layer. Now here you can see that this orange layer, this is actually the neuronal layer, and that is actually called the retina. This retina, this is the continuation of the forebrain, and this actually from this optic nerve, the neurons actually giving the supply here, and this actually transmit the impulse to the central nervous system for processing, and we can do further the visualization. And here you can see just these are the ciliary bodies. Here you can see another 3D model, and this is the lateral view. This part is cornea, and here containing the aqueous humor as I mentioned, and this is the anterior chamber, and this is the lens actually, the bluish color. This bluish structure, this is the lens, and these are basically the suspensory ligaments, which you can see here, the whitish in color, and this total part is called the vitreous body or vitreous humor there contains. And this is the iris, and just in front of the lens, this space is called the posterior chamber, which also containing the aqueous humor. Now if we just remove them, here you can see that this is the posterior chamber. This chamber actually just in front of the lens, that is the posterior chamber. Okay, let's go for another visualization. This is another lateral view, and this is that lens. This is the aqueous humor, this is the vitreous body, and this is the optic nerve actually. And here actually you can see the blood vessel, that is the central retinal artery, which is actually piercing through this. Now this sheath actually, this is the optic nerve sheath. Now this is the inner part of the retina. Here you can see this is the inner part of the retina, and this spot, this is actually the where the optic nerve actually piercing through. This part is called the macula, and the macula is the part of the eye where actually there will be high concentration of the photoreceptor cells. On this middle of the macula, the deepest area is called the fovea centralis. They are containing the most abundant, most concentrated photoreceptor cell, and this actually give the highest sense of vision. This optic disc or blind spot both are similar, and this blind spot is where the optic nerve and blood vessels leave the eyeball. If the light actually fall here, there will be no visualization, no image will be formed. This part actually having no sensitive, photosensitive cells or light sensitive cells, and that's why you can't see anything when the light actually fall directly on that. And you can see that these are the blood vessels. Now let's talk about the arterial supply in the eye. Now here you can see that this is the internal carotid artery originating from the common carotid artery. This will be divided into two. One is the external carotid artery and internal carotid artery. So this is basically the branch of internal carotid artery, and from this artery this is actually coming, and this is called the ophthalmic artery. Now this ophthalmic artery, here you can see the branches which are going on, and here if I do zoom in, and this is basically the lacrimal artery which is also originating from here. This lacrimal artery, this directly giving the supply to the lacrimal gland. As well as here you can see that this is the zygomatic branch of the lacrimal artery. This actually, the zygomatic branch of the lacrimal artery, this actually going to the zygomatic region, and it's the directly branch of the lacrimal artery. Now here you can see another branch. These are the short posterior ciliary arteries which are actually supplying to the ciliary region, and these are actually, this is also the short ciliary. These are the long posterior ciliary arteries. These are also supplying those regions, and this white structure, this is called the optic nerve, and these are the short ciliary arteries. Now these ophthalmic arteries, these are actually giving the supply to the orbit, and from here this is actually another branch which is originating from the ophthalmic artery. There will be originating of another branch. This is called the supraorbital artery. This is actually giving the supply, the blood to the forehead region, eyebrows and upper eyelid. Here you can see that this is also from the ophthalmic artery. There is the branching. This is the medial palpebral artery giving the supply to the palpebrae. This is the medial palpebral arteries. This giving supply to the medial part. This is the medial palpebral artery which is actually coloring here. And this is actually superior medial palpebral arteries, which is actually giving the supply to superior palpebrae. These are basically the anterior ciliary arteries. These are anterior ciliary arteries. And these are the supratrochlear arteries. These are not important here. They are also originating the inferior orbital artery, and the inferior orbital artery, this actually supply the floor of the orbit. So these are the major arteries which are actually giving the supply to the orbit. Now let's talk about the venous supply. So this is basically the cavernous sinus. The cavernous sinus is a part of brain's dural venous sinus, and this is actually dural venous sinus and contains the multiple neurovasculatures. So here actually these veins are getting drained out here. These are actually drained out here, and this is called the cavernous sinus. And here you can see that this vein, if I do zoom in, this vein actually, this is called the superior ophthalmic vein. This superior ophthalmic vein, which is here, this actually drains the venous blood from the structures of the upper orbit. And from here you can see that there is another branch. This is the supraorbital vein. This actually drains the venous blood from the upper eyelid, then eyebrows, and then associate structure. This also carry the blood, and the supraorbital vein also drain the blood from the forehead region. Now you can see there is another branch, and this is called the vertigous vein or vortex veins. This vertigous vein, or these are called the vortex veins, these actually drain all the blood from the choroid layer of the eye. And here you can see this is the lacrimal vein. Lacrimal vein actually drains the blood from the lacrimal gland, and this is called the communicating vein. This vein actually, which is pinkish in color, this is called the communicating vein. This communicating vein actually communicating between these two veins. This is called the inferior ophthalmic vein, which is giving the supply to inferior region of the orbit, and this actually communicating vein, which is actually doing the communication between the superior ophthalmic vein and inferior ophthalmic vein. Now here actually you can see the supply. So here you can see these are also giving the branch to vertigous veins. All the blood from the choroid layer of the eyeball, these actually come by this vertigous vein and ultimately to the ophthalmic vein, and this ophthalmic vein carry the blood to the ultimately cavernous sinus. This is actually, here you can see that this is the infraorbital vein. This infraorbital vein actually giving the supply to inferior part of the orbit. This actually coming from the pterygoid plexus. So these were basically the major veins of the eye which were actually draining the blood from the eyeball. Now here you can see that these are the nervous supply of the eye. Here you can see that this is the trigeminal ganglion. These are the postganglionic fibers, and this is called the ophthalmic nerve. There's the ophthalmic nerve. This is the internal carotid artery that I mentioned, and this nerve actually, this is the maxillary nerve, which is actually supplying to the maxillary region. These are the short ciliary nerves which actually parsing the cilia. This is the lacrimal nerve which actually control the lacrimal secretion, control the lacrimal gland. And this is the infratrochlear nerve. And here you can see that this is the major nerve, that is the optic nerve, just taking all the impulses and carrying all the impulses to the brain for processing. So these are some major nerves here. So I hope you got the crystal clear idea by this model about the eye, their innervation as well as their supplies. Thank you.